It's Platt, and today we visit the king of beers. That's next to Platt's Beer of the Week. Well, okay, the particular beer we have today comes from to us from the king of beers, Budweiser. This is the Budweiser Nitro Reserve Gold. As I do every one of my videos, I give a little background on the brewery. This one most people know. This beer, like I said, was produced by Anheiser Busch, which is a division of AB InBev. Now, AB InBev is a result of several mergers, particularly between three major brewery conglomerates. There's Interbrew, based in Belgium. There's Ambev, based in Brazil, and then there's Anheiser Busch, based in the U.S. Through a series of mergers, different breweries and distribution networks collected through the years, these three conglomerates end up merging, and they are now the largest brewer in the world, or largest beer company in the world. A little bit about the background. I thought today we'd go in a little bit about the origins of Anheuser Busch, particularly. The original brewery was built back in 1852 by a gentleman named George Schneider. George opened a brewery that was known as Bavarian Brewery. It was based on the south side of St. Louis. Unfortunately for George, the brewery never really took off, and by about 1860 he was in financial trouble, about to go bankrupt, and he had to sell. And he sold to a local group of businessmen who were basically just looking to buy a business at pennies on the dollar. One of the gentlemen in the group of businessmen was a gentleman named Eberhard Anheiser. He was a local soap manufacturer and actually did real well. But Anheuser never really had the true passion for the brewing business. This was just another business transaction to him. However, the world and Anheuser Busch lucked out, because the next year in 1861, a gentleman named Adolphus Busch married Anheuser's daughter and got brought into the family business. Now, Adolphus Busch, he did have a passion, or Adolphus Busch did have a passion for beer. And so he was very eager to become part of the company, and he did by starting off as a salesperson in the company and eventually working his way up and saving enough money to eventually buy out some of Eberhard's partners. And at that point, he started taking a larger role in the brewery. Now, what Adolphus, sorry, the kid, the future generations of Bushes, or Augustus Busch, but Adolphus was again the founding member, or the gentleman that really pushed Anheuser Busch to the next generation. And it was through a series of practices that really developed Anheuser Busch from just being a local St. Louis brewery to the national conglomerate it became. Some of those things were pasteurization. They were the first brewery, really major brewery in the U.S. to pasteurize their beer. The use of refrigeration, and more specifically refrigerated rail cars. That ended up helping them set up a distribution center. Now, at the time, there really wasn't distribution there. Pretty much every brewery was just a local brewery. And in major cities like St. Louis, Chicago, and stuff like that, they weren't even necessarily distributing all through town. They might have just been on the south side or wherever, or distribute to a few bars, just selling cakes to a few bars, and that's about it. Because of the developments that Adolphus created, Budweiser now could be shipped further. The beer was more stable because of the pasteurization, so it could last either train rides or horse and buggy rides, X amount of miles, X amount of time. And that allowed Anheuser Busch to really step forward and become the first true regional and, even more importantly, national brewery. Another thing Adolphus did was, in the 1870s, he took a tour of Europe and did some research on different styles of beer. And one of the styles of beer he came up with, or interacted with, is a Czech Pilsner. He found that this style of beer, real light, real thirst quenching, was really appropriate for the hardworking American customer. People were moving west, people were moving south, warmer climates. They wanted a good thirst quenching beer, and the Czech Pilsner style really fit that. And so much so that in 1876 he introduced Budweiser, which is based off a Czech beer called Budweiser, or Budweiser, where it's slightly shortened. And there was legal wranglings in the past on who really owned the name Budweiser, and things got settled out. But anyway, that's a brief little recap on the start of Anheuser Busch. Before we try this beer, though, let's check out the stats. All right, well, before we try this beer, I just want to talk about nitro beers. This is a Nitro Reserve Gold by Budweiser. We tried another nitro earlier, the pineapple pina colada flavored beer. So I thought today we'd take a chance to kind of go over what actually is a nitro beer. Now, the term nitro refers to the gas nitrogen, and these beers are carbonated with nitrogen instead of the standard CO2. If you're a home brewer, you know that's CO2 is a natural byproduct of fermentation, and when you bottle at home, you kind of restart fermentation in the bottle to carbonate with CO2. What is done here is they, again, substitute nitrogen. Now, nitrogen is not a natural byproduct of fermentation, thus the nitrogen has to be forced in. Actually, the mixture, or what's in most of these nitro beers, is not pure nitrogen. It's generally a 70-30 mix of nitrogen and CO2. So there's still a little CO2, but nitrogen is driving the bus as far as carbonation on this. Originally, nitrogenated beers were just on tap, and you needed a special restrictor plate to do this. This is not something you wouldn't throw a nitrogen beer on your just regular keg fridge. It wouldn't necessarily work like that. You may remember seeing a Guinness tap with plastic nozzle instead of the standard tap nozzle, and that's again due to the fact that nitrogen is used instead of CO2. The origins of nitrogen beer start with Guinness, who probably has the most famous nitrogen beer. They created their first nitrogen beer in 1959 to celebrate the brewery's 200th anniversary. The drive behind this, as the bird will tell you, the drive behind this was that they wanted to create the perfect pour, the perfect pint. If you've ever worked behind a bar or poured a ton of draft beer, you know CO2 can be tricky, especially if you're busy, you kind of walk off. If you don't hold the glass right, you're going to get too much head, you'll get too much foam over. And where the nitrogen, the way the bubbles, the way the gas is released, kind of stays in there. So if I had a true, let's say this is a true pint glass, it's slightly smaller, but if I had a 16-ounce can of Guinness, I could just dump it right in there and it would not overflow. Or if I took a regular Budweiser, Bud Light, something carbonated with CO2, and I just dumped that in there, we would have a mess. And that's what Guinness was trying to work out. One of the happy byproducts, though, is nitrogen beers tend to have a creamier mouthfeel too. It's a different mouthfeel than the CO2 also. Also, too, CO2, if you start chugging, like I said, your Bud Lights, Miller Lights, or whatever, the belches, the gas you're going to get really does kind of affect your gut, where these nitrogen beers don't have quite, don't cause quite the gassiness that you get from regular CO2 beers. So that's a little bit about nitro beers. Let's try a nitro beer. See, I'm kind of pouring in aggressive, but we don't get that big hit. I want to say it's idiot proof, but I don't want to go that far. So see, that head starts closing. We still get a decent sized head. A little maltiness on the nose, nothing special. Let's give her a try. That's nice. That is, there's definitely more of a mouthfeel to it than a regular Budweiser. This is not a light as body beer. I get a little more maltiness than I do a regular Budweiser. In full disclosure, when I started drinking beer, actually regular Bud was kind of my brand. And I still have a certain fondness for it, even though, yes, I know it's Budweiser. But I gotta say, this is a step up. I think I pick up just a shade more, kind of a hop finish. This has a longer finish, more mouthfeel than a standard Budweiser. If you're expecting a standard Budweiser, you're not necessarily going to get that. The theme's kind of similar, but I can tell the color's darker. There's a little more body. Just a little more to this beer. It's still very drinkable. It's still I guess kind of a pub standard. You know, this is something you could drink in the summertime or whatever. But this has a little more substance than standard Budweiser. Again, I kind of like the mouthfeel of nitro beers. So I'm going to overall say this is a decent beer. If you are a fan of the Budweiser line of products, I definitely throw this in, give her a try. I do appreciate, I want to say how the major breweries, your Bud, Coors, Miller, that kind of triad. Even you could probably throw in Heineken in this. I do feel Budweiser tries more things. Anheiser Busch tries more things than the other breweries. They're, you know, always kind of playing around with different beers. I believe I tried a black lager they had not too long ago, or I can't remember offhand. But I do like that they at least kind of try different things, and this is something different. I'm not going out of my way if I go to the liquor store next week and it's gone, it's not going to break my heart, but it is something different. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or beers that you'd like me to try, please leave them in the comment section, or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bottoms up.